So there's a bill about to hit the Senate floor, and in the draft, the Treasury is legally allowed to freeze your money. No court order, no judge, they can just go in there and freeze your funds. It's sitting inside something that you might have heard of called the Clarity Act.
Clarity Act.
Clarity Act.
A Clarity Act.
Clarity Act has been the act that crypto industry has been begging for. They've been begging for years to get it approved by Washington. But the head of research at a publicly traded crypto company called Galaxy Digital is in complete disagreement with this. He wrote that this would be the single largest expansion to financial surveillance authorities since the US PATRIOT Act. Now, if you don't know what that is, the PATRIOT Act was something that the government passed after 9/11. It essentially let the government watch everybody's communication and everybody's money. Even if you're a US citizen, they can treat you like a foreign individual.
That it's impossible to proceed without it. We have to get this Clarity Act across the finish line, and market participants who don't want it should move to El Salvador.
That's US Treasury Scott Bessent. And a few weeks later, the CEO of Goldman Sachs said this. The funny thing is, I'm actually filming this here in El Salvador. About 2 years ago, I escaped Canada and have been living here ever since. So when I saw these two guys saying that if you don't agree with this bill, just move to El Salvador, my ears kind of perked up. And last week, Scott Bessent went on TV and said that they're essentially at the 1 yard line with this act.
We're also working on the Clarity Act to make the U.S. the best place for digital assets. And I think we're at the 1 yard line on that.
That same day, Coinbase stock went up by 10%. The industry begged for this bill for years, and every time it gets moved further along in the government, you see that crypto just pumps up. But the guys who are actually reading the fine print is saying that it's a complete break into our privacy. So in this video, I want to show you what this bill actually is, why Washington wants it to go through. The community down here in El Salvador, Bitcoiners, are absolutely against it. P.S. It has almost nothing to do with crypto. And there's a secret power in that bill that I haven't heard anybody talking about. So with that said, let's get into it. My name is Ivan Hidalgo. This is the Golden Bear, where we stack hard money and watch the empire fall. Okay, so before we go into any fine print here, what is this bill? For about a decade, every crypto company in America fought over this one question. Is a token a security? Because if it is, then it falls under the regulatory power of the SEC, and selling one is illegal. That's why the SEC could just sue anybody it wanted, because there was no actual law, there was no rule against it. So whatever the SEC was feeling that week, they would do. The Clarity Act ends that fight. It essentially says things like Bitcoin are a commodity, a digital commodity, a raw thing that gets traded like gold, oil, and wheat. And commodities get regulated by a much friendlier regulatory body called the CFTC. So the question is, why does the government want this? Why is Washington acting like they love Bitcoin so much? Is it because they believe in the fundamental thesis that Bitcoin is money and should be used instead of the dollar? Obviously not. I think that they're using Bitcoin as a Trojan horse. They love stablecoins. I did a whole video explaining what stablecoins are in my Tether video. Click on that if you want more. But essentially, a stablecoin is a digital dollar backed by US government debt. Tether alone holds more than $100 billion of US debt. So this means that anytime anybody uses a stablecoin or buys a stablecoin, swaps dollars for a stablecoin, that's more US debt that's getting bought. And right now, the US government needs more people buying their debt. Now scale that up. If the world's payments get onto a digital rail, that means there's an automatic buyer for US Treasury bonds, for US debt. So Washington's looking at this like, hey, every time that a kid in Argentina downloads this app and buys some USDT because they want to trade some cryptocurrency, we get more people buying onto our debt? Yeah, of course we want that. This is not a crypto bill. This is a demand for Treasury bill. This is the way that they will pay off their debts. And that's also why banks are at war over this. Because if a crypto company pays you 4% to leave your USDT or USDC on their platform, and a bank pays you essentially zero, your deposits are going to leave. That is the Jamie Dimon versus Brian Armstrong fight right now. Dimon runs JP Morgan, and Armstrong runs Coinbase. They're not fighting for your digital freedom. They're fighting for where you are going to put your digital deposits. Okay, so here's the trick, and it lives in one word: a commodity. When you buy physical gold, the law watches the dealer, not the gold. Nothing about the metal itself reports to the law. Same thing with oil, same thing with wheat. There's a law behind this from the 1970s called the Bank Secrecy Act. And essentially what it does is it deputizes the banks. What that means is that the bank watches you, not the commodity. So the banks essentially have a body cam on them. Your metal doesn't, your commodity doesn't. Crypto is about to become the first commodity in history that has a body cam attached to it. It gets called a commodity so institutions can own it cleanly, and it gets monitored like a bank account so the government can track it. Now, let me be exact about this because I don't want to oversell and make you panic. Exchanges already do this. They do something called a KYC, know your customer. And if you have a Coinbase account, they already know who you are. So anybody telling you that crypto is some secret way that nobody can track, well, there are ways to do that, but they're usually not allowed on the exchanges. What's new is what got bolted on top. Last summer, a law called the Genius Act turned stablecoin issuers, companies behind the digital dollar like Tether, into financial institutions. So they are now regulated the same way banks are. That was the foundation. The Clarity Act is the second floor. In the draft that Alex Thorne read, you have to know that they're changing the draft more and more as we speak, especially because this is an extremely controversial thing. There's a mechanism called temporary hold. The Treasury can direct crypto companies and stablecoin issuers to freeze any accounts. No court order, no law, no judge signing anything, it's just frozen. If there's a review, it comes after the freeze, not before it. Now, a freeze power is only as big as the thing it's able to freeze. Currently, 3 out of 4 crypto transactions happen via stablecoins. And one more piece that I found pretty dark is that this law gives companies protection if they freeze transactions in good faith, which sounds reasonable, but put yourself in the chair of a compliance officer. The Treasury calls, hello, yeah, we'll just freeze everything, right? We don't want to get in trouble with you guys. That's what's going to happen. So who's fighting this bill and who's with it? Because there we can actually see who the friends are and who the enemies are. Well, this week, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, one of the largest banking institutions in all of the United States, endorsed it, which for me doesn't make a lot of sense because they're essentially robbing customers from them. He said, very supportive of moving the Clarity Act forward. But if you actually look into it, their ETFs are already positioned. US Bitcoin funds hold about 6% of all coins ever created, and BlackRock's share is the biggest by a mile. But this is the one part that if you look into it, it's kind of sketchy. The custodian holding BlackRock's Bitcoin is none other but Coinbase. So who is against it? Well, it's Coinbase. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? But Coinbase is not a freedom fighter. Watch this. When Armstrong pulled out of the act in January, the same day it was postponed. That's real power. But it wasn't around surveillance and your rights. It was about yield. The draft threatened the interest that Coinbase earns for holding all of these stablecoins, which is the lion's share of their profits. Then in April, the Senate compromised on that, and Armstrong came running back and agreed, pushed the Clarity Act through. So let's look at the sequence. They walked away, they got the money piece fixed, so they walked back in. The banks and the crypto companies had a little knife fight about interest rates and how much they're going to make over your deposits. And nobody during all this time even touched the word frozen. They don't really care about it at all. That is the missing power that's in this bill that they don't seem to really care about. Real quick, if you want the plumbing explained of what you see in the headlines, hit the subscribe and like button. It helps me a lot. Thanks. So you might be thinking, okay, this is a draft. This is just going to be stuck in bureaucracy forever. And yeah, it'll be stuck there for a while, even though Trump is trying to get this pushed through as quickly as possible. But there's a version of this that's already running. The US Treasury Secretary, and he's bragging about this, has already been freezing accounts in Iran, over $130 million, and they were using a stablecoin, more specifically, Tether's stablecoin USDT. But the thing that I noticed is that Bessent himself said that decentralized assets like Bitcoin cannot be frozen, cannot be controlled. So this is not FUD over Bitcoin, this is FUD over stablecoins. Catherine Austin Fitts has a great framework that says, in every transaction, there are two locks, the buyer and the seller, where the money's coming from and where it's going to. Either party can stop the transaction from going through. But with digital rails, there comes a third party, someone else that can stand in between and can actually freeze the transactions, and now they can do it without your consent. So let me tie this together and answer the question from the start. How is something so pervasive like the Patriot Act also a massive win for crypto? Because the bill is both things at once. It's clarity for the crypto industry, but at the same time, it is reaching into your legal rights. The day they call it a commodity is the day that they can freeze your transactions. They told everybody that doesn't like this bill to move to El Salvador. To me, that was music to my ears. I'm already down here. Stack the gold, pay off the debt, get out of this system, and I'll see you in the next one.